Hi, everyone. I'm Josipa Petrinic, the President and CEO of CUTRIC, and welcome to the Pan-Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Electric Bus Demo and Integration Trial Phase 3 inaugural kickoff session. We are recording the session today, so if you do need to go back and listen to it or share with your colleagues, you'll be provided with that video recording via our YouTube channel. So I'm just going to take a minute here while people are logging into the virtual room to introduce some of my colleagues. We have on the line Salmia Babsar. Salmia, over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, Josipa. Hello, everyone. My name is Saumya Bhavsar. I lead the phase 2 of the fuel cell bus demonstration and integration trial at CUTRIC, and I've been here for the last year and a half. I look forward to engaging with you in the upcoming months to kick off and expand our ongoing project here at CUTRIC and to work with you to assess your needs and to get more buses on the ground in Canada. And yeah, look forward to presenting what we've got here for you.
Thank you, Salmia. Thanks so much for that. And we have on the line also our colleague Mediev joining us from Montreal. Over to you, Mediev.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Mediev Susaltines. I'm a membership success officer at CUTRIC, and so I'm very happy to be here. And if you have any questions at some point as well, feel free to ask them and we'll answer them happily. Thank you.
Thanks, Mediev. And we have on the line from Alberta, our colleague Conrad Kessier. Over to you, Conrad.
Hello, everyone. My name is Conrad Kessier. I'm based in Calgary, and I lead the zero emissions bus committees at CUTRIC and also the demonstration and integration trial for the Pan-Canadian electric bus work that we do here at CUTRIC. So welcome to our session.
Thanks, Conrad. And certainly last but not least, furthest on the East Coast, over to Jess.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jess Smith, and I'm the Government and Funding Proposal Coordinator here at CUTRIC.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. So we have almost just over 60% of registered participants have logged in now, and I expect a few more will trickle in. We have a lot to get through, so we're going to get started right away. And Sam, I'll just ask you to move forward to the agenda. To review for folks, what we've got lined up here is a pretty intense round of about the first hour is a lot of content to share with you about where we are at, what we've been doing, and really what the next step in the phase 2 and 3 demonstration and joint procurement possibility is for hydrogen fuel cell buses. And then we have the end of the session is a roundtable with the transit agencies on the line. So we'll walk you through that. And that's an opportunity for us to glean a little bit of info about readiness level for some of your agencies. Several of you are here just for information because you want to know. And several of you are here because you're ready to go. You've done your feasibility study and you know you need some fuel cell buses and you're not quite sure how to go forward and you're interested in maybe there could be a joint procurement arrangement or some type of model there. So that's what we're going to assess by the end of today. And then we have a couple more sessions coming up before we get to a closed door environment. So we'll go forward to the first item on the agenda, which is a welcome to everybody. And if you can move forward to attendees, just by way of attendees, we're going to ask folks, we're going to download the entire participant list. But if you do take a look at your colleagues on the line, we've got over 54, actually over 60, I think, registered agencies on the line here today. So a lot of transit agencies from West Coast to East Coast, several large agencies through to small agencies that have joined us today. Some of you are members, some of you are not members of CUTRIC. So for those of you who are not familiar with CUTRIC, we will start with a review of some of what CUTRIC is and just a high level outline of what CUTRIC is and what we do in case you're not familiar with it. We also have a few of the fuel providers on the line, but we didn't open this call in this instance to manufacturers and on the industry side. And that's largely because we want to really focus on transit agency readiness before we open it up to manufacturers in the fuel cell bus domain. So that's the introduction to the attendees. And we would ask if you want, if you cannot rename yourself, but your registration does not reflect your agency name, you may want to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat function. So with that, we'll go forward to the first element on the agenda, which is an introduction high level to what CUTRIC is. And for that, I'm going to turn to Mediev so she can set the scene of what we are and who we are and what we do for those of you who have not been members and you're not familiar with who and what we are. Over to you, Mediev.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know us, so we're CUTRIC and we're a consortium of transportation innovation leaders. And so we've been funded in, we were funded in 2015. And so we have more than 130 members, between 130 and 40 members spread across the country and from the different type of the sector of the industry. So we have, as you can see, industries, consultancy, utilities, transit agencies and operators, government entities, as well as academics and nonprofits. And what join us all together, what links us is that we all focus on low carbon, smart mobility and technology innovation. And so that's what makes us very special at CUTRIC, is that we focus on innovation. If there is something that needs in the transportation sector that needs to be tested, demonstrated, improved, so that's where you can find us as well. And so if you want to move to the next slide, thank you. So our vision is to make Canada a global leader in the low carbon, smart mobility, technology innovation across different types of platforms, and also looking at advanced transit, transportation and integrated mobility application. And so that goes along with our mission as well. If you want to move to the next slide, please, which is to support the commercialization of technologies through the industry-led collaborative research, development, demonstration, integration as well, projects. And so we have three main areas of activity at CUTRIC. So we have first commercialization projects. Then we have our research and consulting team that does feasibility studies, among others. And we have finally our membership services. And so I'm going to quickly look at them with you. So for our commercialization projects, we have four main ones going on right now. And we are also working on the rail innovation program that might lead soon to a new commercialization project as well. But the four ones that we have right now are here. So we have the Pan-Canadian Electric Bus Demonstration and Integration Trial, the Pan-Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Electric Bus Demonstration and Integration Trial, and then the National Smart Vehicle Demonstration Project and the ACES Big Data Trust. And so in a nutshell, the first one, so our e-bus project, is about the standardization and interoperability of chargers and electric buses. And so it is spread through 3 different cities in Canada. And we are looking at for transit agencies to be able to interchange chargers and electric buses from different companies. And so this project is going very well, and we are collecting the data and looking at the lessons learned and improving the different technology. And so then we have the Pan-Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Electric Bus. I won't go into much detail because we're going to talk about this a lot today. And so then we have our National Smart Vehicle Demonstration Project. So here again, looking at interoperability as well and standardization, but looking at this time at smart vehicle and so autonomous shuttles as well in cities and so on. And so finally, we have the ACES Big Data Trust, which focuses on having a platform where all data related to automated, connected, electric, and shared vehicles across Canada would be stored and could be shared with people. And so we could have lessons learned, data there from different projects. And so that could be accessible to the people from the industry. And so these are our 4 commercialization projects. And so we also have, as I mentioned before, we had our ZEB consulting teams as well, which does feasibility modeling studies. And we're going to talk about that a bit later as well. And then we have our membership services. And so if you are not a member of CUTRIC, so just so you know, there are a lot of membership benefits. And so as you can see here, you have access to our ZEB committees that I will talk in a minute. We do have 2 committees that are open only to our members. So we have the Zero Emission Bus Committee and the Power Providers and Utilities Committee. We also have access to, we do have conferences. We're going to talk about that a bit later as well. So you have discounts to our conferences. You can have access to sponsorship opportunities as well and networking opportunities, not only through our conferences, but also webinars, different projects, webinars like the one we have today as well. And you also have access to the consulting services, and you can participate in government outreach, lobbying efforts, and also our demonstration program. And you can also co-bid with us on requests for proposals. So as you can see, lots of things that are available to our members. And if I want to go into a bit more details with those 2 committees that I was telling you about in just a minute. So the Zero Emission Bus Committee is a committee that happens once a month. Every month it has a different subject, but it's always related to zero emission buses. And so sometimes we will have, like, for instance, the subject will be, for instance, retrofit of buses electrification, chargers, different topics like that. And so it encompasses people from the industry across all Canada and also from abroad. And so it's a one-stop shop for everybody looking at new technologies and what is going on in Canada and across the world as well, and what are the procurements, deployments, performance as well. And so this is the Zero Emission Bus Committee. And then we have the other one, which is our power providers and utilities, the Transit Decarbonization Committee. And so this one focuses on having a national dialogue on the electrification of transit. And it's not only for utilities, it is open to everybody. And so we invite everyone from our industry to participate. It happens twice, every other month, and also there is a different topic to each committee. And so we'll look at like best practices with utilities, but also everything related. For instance, it can be about hydrogen, about electricity, all these different topics as well. And we talk about our different studies that we do as well. And then finally, we also have the membership directory, which is a great benefit to our members. So this is a one-stop shop, like a place where people can find the members, representatives from every organization that is a member. And so, for instance, if you want to look at a member and you're like, oh, I would like to see who is the representative, because I know that this person works on innovative mobility, like smart mobility, you can have access to it as well with their contact information. And so that is a way of, networking and getting to know other people involved in our sector. And so, as you know, today we're going to talk about fuel cell electric buses as well, and we're going to look at modeling studies and feasibility studies. And so just so you know, if you are a transit agency and you are interested in doing these type of studies, there is funding available. And so there is the Zero Emission Transit Fund that was launched last year. And if you do not know, CUTRIC has been selected as a national service provider for the planning stream of the Zero Emission Transit Fund. And so if you are interested in knowing more and you are interested in knowing how CUTRIC can help you create these studies and help you move towards your decarbonization goals, well, feel free to reach out to either to myself, and I will be able to help you, as well as my colleague Aniket as well. And so you have my contact information here. You will see them. Yeah. So you can find them online on our website as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for the worldwide tour. And that was fantastic, Mary. A very quick overview. So that's given a chance to some of the folks who've registered to log in. And if you are unfamiliar with any of those activities and you need a bit more details, please do reach out to Mediev. So now what we're going to do is just flag the fact that we do have our 2 conferences coming up. Just to remind members and non-members, we've mushed together the 2 conferences. So our annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Conference, which is focused on the shared route to zero emissions and net zero, is the first part. It's the first 3 days from November 28th to 29th and 30th. And that is around zero emissions public transit and electric bus at Scarborough Convention Center. And then the next 2 days, December 1st and December 2nd, at the same location is the Smart Rail Conference, where the focus is on track to net zero, everything battery, electric, hydrogen, fuel cell, rail oriented, and autonomous rail. So the whole conference together is 5 days. It's actually 2 conferences in one. And we know a lot of members have been on vacation during the summer. Some of you are not members on the line here today, so you might not have gotten the information, but there's the code there. So if you use that code at the bottom, FCEB_web 20%, you will get the early bird rate for members even past the early bird date. So you can utilize that in case you missed it over the summer months. We're going to go forward though, and we're just going to share with you a little bit of a video that will offer you a bit of insight into some of the technology we're going to be discussing at that conference, including the hydrogen fuel cell tech. Thank you, Salma. I get so inspired when I see that video. So we have a lot to talk about. That's true. We got to save the country. So if we move forward, now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of today's webinar. So the first part of this is to take you through an overview of the phase 2 of the Pan-Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Electric Bus Project. Oh, sorry. There we go. If you want to go forward. I think Salma, that's okay. I think Salma, it's just not in presentation mode, so you might want to move forward one and feel free to shut screen and then reload. So we'll take you through basically the overview of the fuel cell bus project that we've been developing now for the last year, 4 years really. So for those of you who are familiar with it, you'll know that this has been a long haul to get this project out the door, and it's created the baseline for the next generation of joint procurement, which is where we are right now. So just to start off, to share with those of you who are less familiar with hydrogen fuel cell technology, or you were at our sessions in 2017, 2018, 2019, and then you exited because you got really focused on your battery electric bus program and you're just coming back to the table. Some of the specs have been updated. So the industry has moved forward. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, the understanding of a hydrogen fuel cell bus is that it is an electric bus. So you don't get away from all the issues of having a battery on board and battery refurbishment, because there is a battery on board your electric bus here. It just happens to have a fuel cell range extender. So right now, if you take a look at today's technology, you have fuel cell modules where you can get the fuel cell module up to a power level of 80 plus kilowatt power, battery capacity of 50 plus kilowatt hours to 100 plus kilowatt hours, fuel tank capacity of 30 kilograms to 50 kilograms, and refueling times of approximate 10 minutes, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. So having said all of that, that's the technology available today. Obviously, the manufacturers that are members and partners want to push for more fuel on board, more power, etc. There are price points that come with that, and there are implications that come with that. But the technology has most certainly advanced in the last couple of years compared to what we were looking at in 2018 and 2019 when we were really in the throes of the fuel cell bus project. If we go forward one slide, we also have within the larger landscape a lot of discussion about where does your hydrogen come from. Same discussion we had years ago about where does your electricity come from. Obviously, everybody wants clean green hydrogen, and clean green hydrogen is the best for pollution and the best for emissions because it comes off the electrical grid, and Canada's electrical grid is about 80% renewable. And unless you live in Alberta or a couple maritime provinces, you're even higher level of renewability. So generally, hydrogen produced off the grid in Canada is generally quite clean. But the problem is there isn't a lot of supply of it. And therefore, you can see on the cost profile, it's very expensive. Low volume, very expensive. Blue hydrogen is essentially hydrogen that is produced from a carbon intense process, but there's carbon capture and storage. So depending on where you sit on the CCS divide, and philosophically in the country, there are those who are fundamentally opposed to CCS as a kind of long-term solution, those who believe it is an absolute long-term solution. The whole idea there is you're producing the hydrogen, but you're capturing the carbon and you're storing it somewhere. The debate at the federal level right now is you're just storing it somewhere and kicking the problem down the road. You're kicking the can down the road because eventually that storage will leak. But on the other flip side, there's a lot of argumentation around the technology is robust enough that the storage is essentially permanent and indefinite. So blue hydrogen is right smack in the middle, mid-size cost, mid-level cost, but emissions are mid-level. And of course, steam methane reformed hydrogen is the gray hydrogen that we want to avoid. It's also the cheapest. It's cheaper than diesel right now. So you would save money tomorrow going to gray hydrogen, but it's a lot dirtier. So as a result, the pathway here is obviously trying to get to green, but there's not enough volume. So getting the volume up, getting the demand up, getting the clientele up, so the production, it starts increasing and volume and price points start coming down. So that's a high level introduction to the buses and to the hydrogen supply chain in the country. The ideal scenario is powerful fuel cell buses with a lot of green hydrogen deployed across the country. Where are we at right now? Right now, not too many fuel cell buses promised or deployed in the country. You can see there right now from CUTRIC's own zero emissions bus database, which we developed based off the inputs from our transit agency members. We've got 10 buses in a funding mode, 33 in procurement mode. That is pretty much all driven by 3 agencies, Mississauga, Winnipeg, and Edmonton. So Edmonton's got their blue hydrogen fueled buses out in Edmonton today. Winnipeg is hard into the procurement landscape with an electrolyzer planned on site. And Mississauga has been working with us for several years to get their 10 fuel cell buses out the door with green hydrogen from Enbridge. So that's where we are. Not a lot in the country right now, but clearly a lot more has to be deployed. Within that, therefore, you can see the breakdown right now in terms of the larger procurements where we're looking at, and it looks like we're missing a dot for Edmonton, but they're there. So there should be a little dot there. Our apologies to Eddie Robar and the team there. We know you're there. So that's the landscape today. Certainly we've moved forward since the BC Transit days, and as you're going to see, the technology has improved, almost doubled in its efficiencies. Beneficially, the federal government's throwing money at this, so that's great. But as you're very well aware, if you've gone through this, and certainly aware if you're in Mississauga or in Winnipeg, the federal government's not covering the cost of green hydrogen over and above diesel, and that is causing a full stop to the projects. And so that's where provinces can most certainly come into play. So if we go to the next slide. Here, we're going to walk you through just a little bit of an overview of the fuel cell bus project in Mississauga to catch everybody up, because it's what we've essentially developed as our knowledge set for today's discussion.
Apologies, a few extra clicks.
Thanks, Salmia. So a lot of partners there, a lot of years of effort gone into that. And the big issue is not that the bus is complicated. I mean, there were some technological aspects around storing the buses outdoor at the Malton facility, but really what we had to overcome and are still working to overcome is the high price point for the hydrogen, the green hydrogen. So if we go forward, there we go. Thanks, Salmia. Just as a high level overview, this project in Mississauga is based on a CUTRIC MOU model. It's the same model we used for our Pan-Canadian electric bus project with TransLink, Brampton, and York Region. It works, it's complicated, but it works to achieve a lot of really important things that a general procurement doesn't achieve. It does require a champion set of transit agencies, in this case, MiWay. It does require the deployment of more than just a small pilot. We won't at CUTRIC spend our time on something that's a 1, a 2, a 3 bus demonstration. It's not worth it. So what we have always looked at is in the fuel cell domain, a minimum of 10 fuel cell buses, or it's not worth the effort to pull together a consortium project. And it's certainly not worth the demonstration effort for the transit agency, has always been our modus operandum. So in this instance, it's 10 fuel cell buses for MiWay. And then it also involved facility upgrades at Malton to prove essentially the buses could be stored outdoors. And it always includes within this MOU model, empirical analysis. So loggers on the buses, loggers on the electrolyzers, just like in our electric bus project, loggers on the buses, loggers on the chargers, and real-time data performance analysis. In the electric bus situation, agencies are starting to see the real power of cross-comparative performance of those buses and chargers. In this situation, what we would be able to see and work with MiWay on is the performance of the buses and the fueling system and comparison to what was predicted. And it helps manufacturers as well see if their products are performing the way that they predicted pre-manufacturing. So that's the MOU-based model. We're going to go into a little bit more detail here to give you the background. If you go forward one slide. To walk you through some of the overview elements, the intention of this project was to launch and monitor a large deployment of 10 fuel cell buses at minimum in the city of Mississauga, where we already have a hydrogen supply chain with Cummins in operation, and over across the road in Markham, the production of green hydrogen. The intention was also to demonstrate the installation of fueling infrastructure at Mississauga Transit's own location. It was also to support the city of Mississauga's goal of reducing its GHGs by 80% by 2050. The goal of the project was absolutely to help Canada reach a net zero goal by 2050 and the 5,000 zero emissions buses by 2026. and of course, to establish a model for deploying fuel cell buses at other agencies across the GTHA in particular. So for those of you outside of Toronto, GTHA is Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. This isn't a preference for Toronto as the center of the universe, it's an economic issue. Really, the bulk of transit agency density is in the GTHA. So if volume is our issue, getting Mississauga, Brampton, York Region, TTC, Durham, and maybe throw in there Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville, getting those agencies to adopt hydrogen fuel cell buses, even at smaller volumes of 10 to 20 to 30, creates the volume demand in a very tight economic area that could create the price point drop-offs for local green hydrogen supply. The only other areas you could see that kind of density really would be Greater Montreal and Greater Vancouver. So that's why we're looking at those areas. Now, the history of this, not to go into too much, but all of you will get this deck, is that it did start in 2017, in the exact same month that we started our electric bus project. The planning was just as technical, the work was just as technical, and we had as many transit agencies around the table. Many transit agencies, however, dropped off by 2019, choosing instead to focus on their battery electrification plans, for which we helped them. It is now true that many of our transit agencies are coming back saying, now we need to look at hydrogen, because either we've done the modeling work for them or another consultant has. And you can see that battery electric buses in depot and with en route charging are very often not achieving 100% electrification, or if they are, the complexities and the cost of doing so are astronomical. And so it looks like mixed fleets are starting to take root in some of those larger and mid-sized transit agencies, or agencies like MiWay are very seriously looking at a substantial portion of their fleet being hydrogen from the get-go. So that's what's happening there. And that project has continued unmitigated with the support of all of those project partners paying through a program management fee in addition to their membership for all the work that has had to go into this. And a lot of the work includes, from 2021 through to 2022, a lot of government lobbying and advocacy. And that's because the federal government and the province, but especially the federal government, in developing its Zero Emissions Transit Fund, really was not understanding that green hydrogen is so extremely expensive and so low volume. And so the Zero Emissions Transit Fund just doesn't cut it on its own. And the Canada Infrastructure Bank, of course, for those of you who have worked with us, cannot finance these things because there's no savings over diesel when you go to green hydrogen. So therein lies a problematic for the country in terms of launching this technology and achieving the goal that the federal government wants. And now we're at the stage of really forcing the provinces into the equation. This model, however, is based on the fact that we did the full fleet predictive modeling for MiWay to know exactly what fuel cell buses would look like. There was the front-end engineering design feed study, essentially, for the fuel supply equipment done by our partners on the fueling side, Enbridge and Cummins. There was a class 3-4 estimation. There was a non-binding MOU that nonetheless creates legal spirit, a culture of binding agencies and entities into the completion of the project. And we are now in the zone of working on funding contribution agreements that are coming up because we're in the funding pipeline federally and provincially. Going forward, the project is intended to last the 5 years. It may be funded for the first 3 years and then extended to 5 years, but that's essentially where we are. So we expect approval and launch in the imminent future. And that is why we were launching the webinar today to start planning for the next round of hydrogen fuel cell buses and integrated fueling. If we go to the next slide. Here's some of the activities, not to go into too depth, but you can see the work. This is just from Q1 to Q1 of last year to Q2 of this year, but this project has been going on for 5 years. So just a whole heck of a lot of work, and thanks, call out and shout out to CUTRIC members in general, because CUTRIC members in general, whether they're in the fuel cell bus industry or not, their membership fees help to pay for a lot of this planning work. So the country has benefited from it, and we want to take all that knowledge and now help all the agencies that don't have the time or money to spend 4 years figuring out how to get to 10, 20, 30 fuel cell buses. It's one thing to launch 2 or 3 pilot buses. It's another thing to get a full fleet integration of 10, 20, 30 towards your integrated zero emissions goals. And that's what we're looking at here. So if we go forward. Lastly, just to walk you through the MOU-based model, this MOU-based model, we have the executed memorandum of understanding, and within that, there is the scope of work that each entity provides. And so Ballard is the provider of the fuel cell stacks. They are also supporting the demonstration outdoor overnight storage conditions. For those of you who were part of the fuel cell bus planning process in 2017, 2018, 2019, you will recall that was not possible at the time. That is an innovation, and hats off to Ballard and New Flyer for making it happen for this project. It is so important for Canada that these buses could be stored overnight in storage conditions that are deep cold, and that is now happening. New Flyer is providing the buses, and they're providing support for the demonstration of the operations on Canadian soil. They will be supporting a lot of the integration and maintenance work, a lot of in-kind dollars going into this for maintenance. We at CUTRIC will be the nonprofit manager of the project, including all of the empirical analysis, so pulling all the data off the loggers being on the electrolyzers and the buses to do real-time performance assessment, just like we do for electric buses. And Enbridge and Cummins have formed a joint venture for this project, and the intention there, they obviously in Markham are producing hydrogen already, green hydrogen off the grid. And this sub-entity, this joint venture, is responsible for delivering the energy to Mississauga, making sure that if anything goes wrong with that delivery supply chain, there is a backup so that MiWay is not stuck without fuel, and really demonstrating that the electrolyzers and the supply chain across the 401 functions for the GTHA community. If we go to the next slide, MiWay is, of course, sorry, Salmi, I skipped over MiWay, the most important entity. They are, of course, the end user. They are the 10 fuel cell bus end user, and they are putting in not just the buses and the driver training and all of that, but support in the civil works at the Malton facility. So if we go to the next slide. Here, therefore, just to conclude on where we're at right now, this project and the funding line is municipal funding has been committed several years over, and hats off to Mayor Bonnie Crombie for constantly approving it at the city council level. So they are funding as a city the equivalent of 10 diesel buses and the equivalent of a hydrogen fuel supply chain agreement for multiple years. Then the industry partners, so that is New Flyer and Ballard and Cummins and Enbridge, are putting in-kind contribution that is in the millions of dollars range. Things where we're saying within the spirit of the MOU, if stuff goes wrong, it's on you to fix it at no cost, and they've agreed to that. We do see the anticipated funding. We're in the funding pipeline already, more than halfway through it. 50% of the eligible costs, we're expecting just over about $10 million there. And then we are looking to the province of Ontario for the remaining cost, which is mostly allocated to the diesel, the green hydrogen price over diesel. So if we go to the next slide. Here is in general on the left what we started with. The ideal scenario, industry covers 25% of the cost in terms of in-kind maintenance and support, because this is new technology. Lots of stuff will go wrong. Somebody's got to be responsible for making it go right. And in the MOU model, all the industry partners are bound essentially to one another to make the project function. The province is the last piece we're working on now with the province of Ontario to get their funding support for the fuel cost over diesel. The federal government ZTF program is a no-brainer. It was set up and we lobbied for it to be set up to fund exactly this kind of project. And the municipality has already put in its portion, which is its diesel equivalent for the years of the project. Where it actually has landed is a bit more like on the right-hand side. So not a perfect 25, 25, 25, 25 split, but it works. And so in our next joint procurement or our next fuel cell bus project, if it's MOU based or a joint procurement based model, it will probably not be a perfect 25, 25, 25, 25 split, but whatever works is going to work for the project. And it's probably going to have a provincial, municipal, federal split with in-kind industry contributions as the winning outcome. So if we go forward, that takes you through a high level overview of where we are with Mississauga. Now, for those of you who have not been part of this before, you're going to want to know, well, what is the actual business case here? Is it just the philosophy of Mississauga that they're jumping into fuel cell buses? And the answer is no. Based on the laws of physics, this stuff works in the Mississauga community. And this is the modeling work that we did, a snippet of it that's publicly available. So for that, over to Salmia to walk you through the justification. And Salmia, over to you if you want to take over here.
Sure. So hello, everyone. So let's see what the basis of all the modeling is. Actually, at CUTRIC, we do a lot of the predictive modeling as well as empirical analysis work through our in-house trademark tool called RootHigh, which is in its second and soon third version of its life cycle. Now, a bit about the modeling tool. So RootHigh essentially integrates insights from 4 different areas. We will have a GIS modeling component, will have a duty cycle generation component, which essentially sets up the operating loads for these buses and scenarios for operating loads, in fact. There's also a charging schedule analysis, which is especially relevant for battery electric buses. In case of hydrogen fuel cell buses, we can refuel these buses just like a diesel bus. So the charging schedule analysis is a little less relevant here. And at the same time, the most important component is just modeling the actual performance of these buses on the routes or the blocks that are modeled on GIS, based on duty cycles that are generated using different operating conditions. And we essentially end up calculating factors like the energy efficiency of the buses in light, medium, and heavy duty cycles, as well as the energy consumed, in this case, the amount of hydrogen that is predicted to be consumed. Now, a lot of these outcomes are based on factors like assessing or predicting the state of charge of the battery on board a bus, and then using that to determine success rates of different blocks or success rates of electrifying different blocks. We'll look at some statistics in the next slides. And based on this, we eventually assess the suitability of the technology to service all the routes or blocks or specific vehicles at the transit agency. We are also able to use the algorithms that run in the background to also calculate greenhouse gas reductions, which is yet another important factor, not just for you as a transit agency, but also for the funders to better understand. Now, looking at some of the results that we've observed for MiWay, and MiWay is a very interesting case. You've got some challenging blocks when you look at electrification. But even for an agency like MiWay, as we've noticed, you can almost electrify 90% of the operating blocks at MiWay successfully. If you were to add a refueling stop in the middle of the operating cycle, you can virtually electrify all of the operating blocks at MiWay without really having to worry about recharging the bus or refueling the bus in between its duty cycle. Now, as you may notice, on Saturdays, these success rates drop. It is essentially because of restructuring of blocks based on the ridership and other conditions on weekends. But overall, you can virtually electrify 100% of the blocks in a system like MiWay's, especially if you were to just allow refueling of the bus, and even without refueling in the middle, 90% is the result that we observe. Emissions reductions. In the case of MiWay, we observed that you could cut down greenhouse gas emissions by almost 90 to 95%. In fact, a lot of this also comes from the fact that this particular project intends to use electrolytic or green hydrogen, which will be using electricity from a substantially low carbon electricity grid that Ontario has. And so especially for this project, we notice the possibility to cut down greenhouse gas emissions substantially. Oh, and just a reminder that you're not going to see emissions at the tailpipe of the bus. All these emissions essentially come from the life cycle of the fuel. Another thing to keep in mind, if you were to assess greenhouse gas emissions reductions, especially as we've learned while developing our funding applications, we also assessed the cradle to grave life cycle emissions of the entire system. Even in such a situation, you can bring down emissions by up to 70% if you were to factor in embedded carbon in all the infrastructure as well. Now, full fleet electrification of the MiWay system, how much is it going to cost? Of course, our current estimates indicate that it will be substantially costly. And in fact, it could be almost twice the cost of actually running a diesel-based operation. But it is based on certain assumptions about hydrogen pricing as well, which is, of course, the most critical factor here, which Josip also alluded to when she introduced hydrogen too. Depending on the scale of production of hydrogen, and not just the scale of production, but the scale of distribution of the hydrogen in your region, you could almost end up spending twice the amount of money to actually run your hydrogen-based transit system, assuming 100% fuel cell buses. However, there's also the opportunity to actually achieve parity with diesel, and in fact be cheaper than diesel, and especially with the most recent diesel prices that you see in the market, that is possible sooner than later. Also, if you were to top these estimates up with carbon pricing, and at the same time, if you were to factor in revenues from clean fuel standard credits into the hydrogen system, you have yet another opportunity to actually cut down the premium of hydrogen over diesel. Now, let us look at some additional case studies, a bit of a comparative analysis, and see how consistent some of these observations can be, depending on the size of the agency as well. Now, for the sake of confidentiality, the names of the agencies have been anonymized, and some of our member organizations may have seen some of these results in the past. However, it is valuable to have another look as we really rationalize the use of fuel cell buses in our systems. Now, what was done in these comparative studies, we essentially, if we look at the number of vehicles that are compared here, we can see there's a relatively small agency that was starting with up to a mid-sized to a large agency like MiWay. So yeah, we have a comparison between the 200 bus or 200 vehicle agency and something in the range of a 450 to 500 vehicle agency. Now, the comparisons that you'll notice, they're based on different types of studies. In this case, pretty much the same kind of a study, a full fleet block-based modeling analysis was carried out for these three agencies that we're comparing here right now. If you look at the number of blocks that were assessed, and especially number of blocks and routes and number of cases that were assessed based on duty cycles as well, we range from almost 200 blocks to 1,000 blocks, between these three studies. We also range from 5 to 10% non-revenue distances within these systems that were assessed. And so bear in mind that the results you'll be seeing do factor the non-revenue distances here as well. And of course, 40 and 60-foot buses were actually assessed in the case of these three agencies. For agency one, 60-foot fuel cell buses were not really assessed. However, for the other two agencies, 40 and 60-foot fuel cell buses were assessed. Here's a bit of a sample, just to add some visibility. Here's a sample of the different profiles that our tool generates. These are samples of the different duty cycles. As you note, in the top row, you've got speed profile samples, basically speed against the time profile of the particular duty cycle. You see these fluctuations, and they're basically a mark of the starting and stopping of the bus based on starting and stopping of the bus model on top of a GIS route that was modeled for the bus as well, or the block as well. You also note a few different samples of elevation profiles. Actually, in the first case, there's a system where you essentially see two duty cycles back to back. There's a system where the bus starts at a low elevation, functions at a slightly high elevation, and then you're back to lower elevations. But essentially, different grades and different topography is factored into the modeling work that we do, and this just indicates that. You also note a few different distance profiles in the third row. Essentially, the distance of or the length of the block or route mapped against the time as well. And the last row indicates some samples of the grades on the road that the bus encounters. And again, there's substantial variations there as well. But I hope these samples and these visuals help you understand, the modeling that actually underpins the eventual assessment or results on energy efficiency performance of these buses and the energy consumption or hydrogen consumption of these buses. Let's look at some more results here. If you look at the energy efficiency, all three agencies in the medium duty cycle almost indicated a 9 to 10 kilo hydrogen consumption per 100 kilometers of operation. Now, a medium duty cycle is the most notable scenario to look at. Most buses in real life performance are likely to work in a medium duty cycle, roughly average or medium ridership loads, temperature conditions, gradients, topography, etc., being in the medium zone. Now, your buses are, of course, likely to function in the heavy duty cycle as well. However, the results that you see here are based on the modeling of the buses, in a heavy duty cycle 100% of the time. So this isn't really a true indication of reality, but more of a warning sign and just an indication of the kind of caution that you should bear in mind for heavy duty cycle blocks. Essentially, times when the temperature outside is very hot or very cold, drawing a lot of auxiliary load, and also times when this is combined with heavy ridership and a lot of starting and stopping during peak hours. So these are scenarios that mostly happen a couple to 3 hours a day in most cases. But in general, these are scenarios that are very less likely during a day's operation or during a week's operation. Now, if we look at hydrogen consumption results, monthly and annual numbers, so these three agencies will really indicate the type of hydrogen demand that the transit customer segment can generate. If you look at, let's say, agencies 1 and 2, in fact, there's almost a linear increase in hydrogen demand between the three agencies, going from 200 to about 500 buses, about 100 tons of hydrogen demand in the first case for each month, in the medium duty cycle to almost 300 tons of hydrogen demand monthly in the third case with a 500 bus transit agency. If, as an example for agency 3, if you were to translate this to daily consumption, that translates to roughly 12 tons of hydrogen demand per day. As of now, just for comparison's sake, the current demonstration project for Mississauga is based on 10 buses and is anticipated to consume about 300 kilograms. And about a 1 ton plant could fuel up to 30 buses. So I hope some of these numbers help you really understand scale. If you're a transit agency, you can generate substantial hydrogen demand and stable and predictable hydrogen demand for a hydrogen producer or supplier to kickstart a hydrogen economy in your region as well, if that is one of your ulterior goals, besides transit electrification as well. Now, again, a bit of a comparison between greenhouse gas emissions savings. You do see reasonable differences between gray and green hydrogen, as you also had one in the slide before. Gray hydrogen can really deteriorate the business case. It's just that you are eventually releasing the carbon into the atmosphere in the process of making gray hydrogen, thereby neutralizing the reduction in tailpipe emissions. So yeah, as long as possible, the green hydrogen game is the place to go to. Phasing a phasing approach is important in certain situations, and it makes sense in certain situations, of course, to eventually get to the stage of green hydrogen. But as we look at the nation's goals and even regional goals in cutting down emissions, sooner or later, green hydrogen is the direction to go to. Not only does it help you cut emissions, but also become more self-reliant in terms of the energy consumption. Because not only do you have to buy your green hydrogen from a centralized production facility, you can always install an on-site green hydrogen generation equipment, basically an electrolyzer on site, depending on possibilities at your facility. And you could also be generating your own fuel. That is the ultimate goal and possibility as well. Now, another comparative look at success rates. Again, the same pattern here, actually. If you look at the three agencies, the light duty cycle, again, less likely in real life working conditions, shows 100% fleet electrification possibility using fuel cell buses. But as we noted, the medium duty cycle is the most interesting one. And even in the medium duty cycle, 90+ percentage success rates on weekdays in case of all three agencies that we see here. But there is a consistency. And at the same time, there's also a bit of a consistency in deteriorating success rates. On weekends, again, it is not a technology issue. These buses do have the necessary range to, service blocks on the most important days. But yeah, weekends, success rates drop because of restructuring of these blocks or routes. Consistent observation, pretty much. And especially if you combine weekends and heavy duty cycles, consistent observations, except for the last agency. The possibilities or the options to resolve this situation or this conundrum, add a refueling stop, and you can virtually bring up your success rates to 100%. Again, this is just agency 3 in question. Another comparative look at the costs. Now, in this case, you see two different scenarios. Again, a $5 scenario and a $15 per kilo hydrogen scenario, just to show some comparisons of operating costs. Now, one key thing to note here, besides the cost comparisons for these agencies per se, scaling remains an issue. And so it is also in our hands as transit agencies and fuel suppliers to work together to actually prove these graphs wrong, in fact, because end of the day, depending on our scaling trajectories, these cost calculations will change depending on how fast we advance in the hydrogen-based electrification game. We could almost be consistently at the, I'd say, halfway level on this graph. The other thing to note, while we try to seek inspiration, is, today, in reality, the cost of delivered hydrogen in certain situations from a one-ton plant, as we've understood from our experience, is in fact higher than the $15 per kilo figure that you see here. So yeah, the $15 price point is, again, not really an indicator of the true reality in the Canadian landscape today. I invite our fuel suppliers to actually comment and maybe even prove me wrong here. But yeah, the cost of delivered hydrogen remains a massive challenge. And yeah, as I
And
said,
on this
we-
point,
yeah.
maybe Samia, sorry, on this point, we will ask folks, we do have some fuel suppliers in the audience today. You can use the Q&A commentary box to add your comments here, but to summarize on this, as Salmia noted, we've modeled out $15 per kilogram, but even in our own MiWay project, the price point is higher because of low volume. So it is quite substantial, which is why we're asking Minister Mulrooney and the provincial government to really top that up. The goal is to get down to $5 a kilogram because that is price parity with diesel. And for that to happen, we need thousands of kilograms per day in volume. And that would happen if Metrolinx deployed hydrogen fuel cell rail line, or if you had about a few hundred buses in the GTHA, that's where we would get to. So that's essentially the ultimate trajectory that we want to land on. And on that, then Salmi, if you can move to the next slide, that then segues us into the penultimate part of today's engagement. And as Salmia just went through in detailed format, the business case is there from a triple bottom line perspective, from the emissions and perspective and the greenhouse gas perspective, and also frankly from social equity. We don't have time here today to talk about noise reduction and cleanliness of smog pollutants being removed, but there's a social equity story there. The issue is it's economically not feasible for cities on their own right now. But if the province and the federal government are keen on getting this deployed, then these large demonstrators have to happen well beyond small pilots, because we're past the small pilot stage substantially. So just to summarize what we've learned from the work we've done with MiWay as we get that project out the door. Setting goals is really critical. And this is part of the discussion we're going to have here in a moment. We will ask folks, just as a heads up, as Salmia goes through the planning for this next demonstration that we're pulling transit agencies together for, can you take a look in your Zoom line here? It's set up in a webinar format, but if you put your hand up and use the chat function to raise your hand, then Jess will prepare to make you a panelist so that we can bring you on video and audio. And that way we can engage you in the roundtable that will start in about 15 minutes once we take you through the high level of what we're envisioning for our next deployment with our members and partners in the transit agency. And I'll work through the alphabetical list in a moment of transit agencies. We've got 50 folks from the transit industry on the line here today that we'd love to hear from, but we'll pick on a few of you because we know you're further ahead. So the first thing we're going to want to ask you is, do you have your goals set? In other words, what do you want to initiate a demonstration project for? If you are a transit agency that's joining us here today and you haven't done your zero emissions bus feasibility study, it's really early days for you. We strongly recommend that you do the mathematics and the economics first. It takes about 12 months from start to finish. You can get it done in 6 months. If you're a small agency, 3 months. Get the science in front of you, get the price points in front of you, model out your blocks to know what your success rates are. If you're past that period, then your initiation of a demo is probably, will this work very well in our community? And does it help us achieve our ZEB goals given our modeling results? So some of the things Salmi has put there is asset management experience, operational experience, and of course, learning how to collect that data and analyze the data. It's a new age of data collection, and everything zero emissions should be data analyzed and not left to guess. So that, if those are your goals, then really you may want to be at the table here for our next demonstration deployment of fuel cell buses. If you're thinking through your scope drivers, as we've got put outlined here, what's the purpose of the demonstration? You clearly need to learn. Your staff needs to grow and learn, and you need to be able to absorb the right talent and skill set onto your team. You need to be able to determine whether you can access data from other operators in a consortium environment. You need to understand what your project boundaries are based on the province you're in. Some provinces are better than others right now for funding zero emissions bus, and there's only a couple that are really quite obviously in support of this stuff. So you also need to look at your garage capacity and plan out your fuel plan. Is it green or blue hydrogen for the foreseeable future? If you have thought through some of those high-level scope drivers, but you don't have all the answers, you're in a good place to start being part of a consortium-based demonstration. And then lastly, in terms of long-term reminders, the whole reason you'd want to get into a consortium-based demonstration is because you want these long-term collaborative relationships with suppliers and manufacturers. You don't want to go it alone. Possibly, if you're at a smaller scale, you want volume and the volume benefits that come with a consortium model. And then, of course, multiple demonstrations can support across Canada the scaling, and you want to be part of the initiative that helps to scale. So ultimately, these are some of the things to think about. If you're in an environment where you're a large agency and you can go it alone and you really don't need collaborative collaborative partnerships, then by all means, please do, because the volume you add to the industry is going to drop the price point for a lot of us. But if you're a smaller mid-size agency, you can't do it alone because it's a lot of skills and capacities and tech planning, then you're really at the right stage. Or you're a mid-size agency where you've been part of one of our consortium projects before and you see the collaborative benefit and the data benefit. So with that, we'll segue into the final part of our presentation, then we're going to open it up to folks. And I know we're making Scott Gilner a panelist at Brampton. We want to hear from Brampton. We have a bunch of folks on the line from TTC, York Region, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and a few others. So we're going to turn to you in a moment. But for this, I'm just going to turn to Salmia if he can walk us through what we've heard so far, because really at CUTRIC, we don't believe in launching projects that nobody wants. You know, I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to waste your time. So we're only going to launch projects that our members want. And so far, based on the last 6 months of engagement, our members have said to us in the transit industry that they would be interested to know what the next round of demonstration or joint procurement could look like, specifically for hydrogen fuel cell buses, specifically cross-nationally, so not just in the GTHA, but possibly with partners across the country, and with a fuel supply chain integrated, where you're actually potentially having multiple fuel providers in a consortium model, and which would probably have to be the case in this country. So with that, over to Salmia to walk us through the opportunities and the issues ahead, and then we're going to turn to our colleagues on the line for immediate feedback to guide us as to whether we should continue investing CUTRIC membership fees into planning this process for a large-scale demonstrator or procurement in 2023. Over to you, Salmia.
Thanks, Jessica. And so, yeah, based on discussions with some of our existing transit members who are a bit more ahead in their consideration for fuel cell buses, some of the opportunities that, we've all agreed on through an expanded fuel cell bus project like this. First of all, we have the opportunity to foster or build momentum on multi-agency investments, which could then drive innovation and standardization goals. Because there's still a bit of innovation that remains, that there's fuel supply configurations that need to be better understood. The MiWay project has a centralized electrolysis-based fueling configuration, Winnipeg a different one, Edmonton a different one, but there's a few different fueling configurations possible. And so if we had multiple agencies collaborating and investing together, we could advance some of these innovation and standardization goals that still need to be looked at. We could also actually look at next-gen fuel cell bus technology as there's new vehicle models in the market. We have the opportunity to test those out as well. And again, driving innovation goals here. As far as fuel supply equipment is concerned, and not just dispensing equipment, but distribution equipment as well. There's a lot to be learned on the production, distribution, and dispensing front based on real life experiences, because as you may have learned elsewhere, and in case you haven't, distribution of hydrogen remains one of those larger challenges for the whole hydrogen economy to actually build up. And so projects, transit demonstration projects at different scales would present a great opportunity to advance innovation and standardization goals there as well. Yet another example would be how about standardizing dispensing solutions and so on. There's also the obvious opportunity to achieve cost efficiencies because if we were to consolidate our needs and put in single orders or multi-year orders to specific suppliers, then yeah, we could actually achieve some cost efficiencies. Not only does transit have an opportunity here, but it makes life easier for the limited industry players in the space today as well, who are faced with a difficult job of actually predicting demand for the equipment or the fuel. We've obviously got the other big opportunity of harmonizing codes and standards. CUTRIC also did put in a substantial amount of research work in the past when it came to assessing gaps in the code standards and regulations. So have some other organizations in this space. However, we'll only be able to really harmonize codes and standards and better understand these things when we actually have a real gaseous hydrogen servicing bus depot, or when we have a fuel supply chain on the ground, or when we actually have some buses running on the ground. That's when we'll also learn about what can be done to standardize even operating practices in transit when it comes to fuel cell buses. So that is yet another big opportunity here. Another opportunity, strengthening government advocacy, especially focused on the needs of fuel cell bus-based transit. Now at CUTRIC, of course, government advocacy is very much science-based. However, as we've strengthened the rationale for fuel cell buses, it has become increasingly important for us to specifically strengthen a voice for support, to draw support for fuel cell buses, because end of the day, some of the challenges faced by hydrogen-based transit are different compared to battery electric buses and systems that will be using battery electric buses. We are faced with, in the hydrogen world, we're faced with establishing entirely new supply chains and entirely new distribution infra. One massive challenge that does require a stronger voice. Secondly, we also need to strengthen a voice, especially from the transit side, to really make our needs better understood. Another thing that we've learned from phase 2 is really aligning the needs of transit with what industry can provide and with what we can get in terms of funding contribution agreements from the government side as well. And so aligning these needs and making the challenges from transit clear is a very important it's a very important goal that a project like this can achieve, because end of the day, government funding programs may not aid us in the right manner unless the needs are better understood. Eventually, knowledge sharing and templating, of course, which we already do, but an expanded project like this would really heighten our possibilities, and what else we can do in terms of knowledge sharing and templating of existing documents, even existing documents like MOUs or funding applications. There's some efficiencies to be achieved there too. And so in terms of opportunities, based on our discussion with some of our existing transit stakeholders who've been interested in fuel cell buses, this is our understanding. There's actually obviously more needs assessments to be done to really consolidate and validate these opportunities to drive action in this direction. And so that's where we invite further feedback from you as well. And if we look at some of the needs that we've also heard, these overlap with the opportunities in a way, but one of the core needs is just advancing procurement readiness. Again, an obvious phrase, but it just needs to be said again. We need to come together and advance procurement readiness to actually harness all the opportunities that we saw in the previous slide. Expansion of empirical data is yet another especially on specific items, is yet another interesting need that we came across, especially in discussions with the likes of Winnipeg and Edmonton. We've learned that, we need to share more empirical data. First of all, acquire and then share more empirical data, especially when it comes to the cold weather performance of buses. And Winnipeg actually is the only transit agency that intends to purchase 60-foot fuel cell buses as well. And so they'll be some of the pioneers when it comes to generating the workings of 60-footers. But yeah, there's that's definitely a need, and a project like this will create an opportunity to expand data on 60-footers as well. End of the day, asset management and operations and maintenance experience is one of the most widely recognized and obvious needs. But then there's also some additional needs that we heard when it comes to standardizing. There's more standardization necessary before we really feel that these systems are reliable, and before we can collaborate on finding solutions swiftly. We need to standardize equipment specs. Again, the case of dispensers, that's yet another example. There's also, a need and an opportunity to standardize demonstration project models through a project like this, because demonstration projects are very tricky, as some of you may already know, and as we've learned in, the last 7 years of working at CUTRIC. So yeah, demonstration projects can be very tricky. There's room to actually standardize certain things, not blind standardization, of course, but there's room to quickly launch and execute demonstration projects so that we're able to advance the commercial readiness of these new technologies faster than we've seen in the last few years, unfortunately. There's also a bit of a need and again an opportunity to standardize some deliverables that go into projects like these. The business case is an example, the funding applications, the zero emissions transit funding application, greenhouse gas plus assessments, and basically assessments of the life cycle emissions from cradle to grave and so on, that we have to pass on to our funders as well to support these projects. So there is an established need, but an opportunity to standardize some of these items, and we've already worked on some of these items at the 2 or 3 transit agencies that have worked on this project. And then standardization of specs is the obvious need, of course. Last but not least, I'd like to just specify that the ultimate goal, and again, explicitly recognized as a need, is national level coordinated procurement of especially buses and other equipment. And this is where we would love to take a quick look at the 2 dominant project models where we have opportunity. Yeah.
Sorry, Salmia here, if you don't mind, just as a segue from what you ended on there, and this is the final item we'll discuss before we turn to our participants on the line who we've lined up as panelists, so we'll be able to unmute you. This is the finale outcome. So Salmia has just reviewed a bunch of the opportunities we heard, but also a lot of the outstanding technological gaps that need to be overcome. And small pilots or just pilots on their own won't necessarily achieve all of the integrated knowledge that we need for the country to move towards full zero emissions buses en masse by 2030. So we are concerned that there is a gap in the market without these demonstrators that have multiple cities integrated. And this is what we're looking at. So the 2 models that we have at CUTRIC right now, the first one on the left-hand side, and we will ask for your insight here today, and we know some of you are part of this, is the MOU model. This is where we look to our members who are transit agencies, and we look for 2 or 3 or 4 of them. In the case of the hydrogen bus project, it's 1 led by MiWay, but ideally we have 2 to 3 agencies, maybe 4 to 5 at the max before it's overly complex. And all of these agencies get partnered with sole source arranged providers of the buses and the fueling. And the reason the MOU model has worked in the past and it's been sole source arranged is because it had such unique technology elements to it that there was no point going to tender. If you went to tender, no consortium could have responded at the time effectively. There would have been a response, but it would have been full of gaping holes. And so it was a more secure approach to try and get technology innovation out the door with the manufacturers and the fuel providers at the table helping to design the actual integration trial. And just to put it in terms of reality, in the electric bus project we launched, it was that there were no standards for high power charging systems. So without Nova Bus and New Flyer agreeing to redesign their buses, and without ABB and Siemens agreeing to redesign their charging systems, and without Brampton, York Region, and TransLink as transit agencies agreeing to trial out this newly redesigned set of buses and chargers and deal with all the problems that come with that, then the standard would have never gotten issued. And that project fundamentally fed into the SAE J3105 standard that now everybody's buying in North America. So the project itself created the mechanism for feeding into a standard that now is the baseline for procurement in the country. Meanwhile, the project continues because all 3 agencies are learning from each other in terms of the performance of the assets, and the manufacturers are learning from the performance of their comparative asset demonstration. So there's long-term benefits to that consortium model. but it was sole sourced. It was handpicked that it would be Nova Bus and New Flyer, ABB and Siemens, because they were the only manufacturers willing to redesign to the new tech spec that was innovative, unproven, and not market deployed. So that is where an MOU works. In the case of the MiWay project, an MOU works because nobody else was able to provide green hydrogen except for Enbridge and Cummins in Markham. And nobody else in the transit domain was willing to absorb these vehicles, first off, and deal with all of the issues that will likely arise from the first shipment of green hydrogen across a highway to a transit agency. So there's going to be a lot of absorption of risk by MiWay, and there's a lot of absorption of risk by Enbridge and Cummins, and they're really the only ones that were willing to do this. And New Flyer was the only one producing fuel cell buses that could be sold and bought in Canada. So there's no point going to tender. It's an MOU innovation project, and that's why the MOU approach works. Where we are right now in the marketplace, Salmia just reviewed a whole bunch of gaping holes still in terms of Walmart ready, off the shelf, buy your fuel cell buses, go to tender and have no drama. So there's still a lot of gaps. And that opens the question of, is an MOU approach feasible and appropriate, because there's so much innovation. But on the flip side, the technology is really developed. There's a lot more suppliers. The buses are fairly standardized now. So maybe it's at the stage where it is a tender environment. And what we're looking for is really price point reductions and turnkey solution providing. And that would suggest the joint procurement model, which CUTRIC has launched under our new incorporated CUTZEB model. It's our joint procurement division that started business this year. And on the electric bus side, we're doing that work with Burlington and London. Their joint procurement for electric buses and chargers is a turnkey solution with operations and maintenance. So we have that model, and it's feasible that the fuel cell bus deployment round, the next round for CUTRIC, is actually a joint procurement model, not an MOU innovation model, but a joint procurement model where there's a turnkey solution intended, where there might be 3 or 4 or 5 transit agencies buying fuel cell buses, combined with local green hydrogen supply across multiple provinces. And that consortia self-organize in the marketplace to deliver that bus manufacturer, fuel supplier, and integrator. That is entirely feasible. Also has never been done in Canada. And so somebody needs to do it. These are the 2 models that we're looking at right now. And if we're going to get involved in this business and plunk a bunch of time and labor into it, then we're looking to our transit agencies on the line here today to tell us that this is now the time for us to revive a round 2 of a fuel cell bus procurement model. So with that, if you can go to the final slide, Salma, and then we're going to turn to our partners on the line. What we're looking at here is at the next session of this group, we're going to be asking a little bit more deep dive for you to come back with what is your position, what are your goals, where do you stand in terms of your own readiness to launch a capital project? What are your needs to collaborate? So you really, if you can do it alone, then that's great. We want that knowledge and sharing with you as a member of CUTRIC, but if you can do it alone, you don't need to be in the consortium joint procurement, right? Maybe you can do it alone because you're a big agency. But if you do need collaboration because you don't have the labor and you want to outsource the problem, then that makes a lot of sense for why you're at the table here. We'll be looking to see what you think key relationships should be developed within this model, whether it should be the MOU partnership and the OEMs are part of the problem and the solution bound by an MOU, or whether you think it's at the market level of neutrality and it should be a straightforward joint procurement and tender approach. We'll be looking to see what your procurement readiness and stakeholder management needs are, and then how we can support you, which means you may not have your feasibility done. So you need the feasibility work done. You then need the decision-making at council, and then you want to be part of a joint procurement. So we'll be doing that analysis with all of our transit agency members. Like I said, some of you are not members, but please put up your hands so we can at least do that analysis with you and figure out where you are in the readiness table. So what we're going to do now, we're going to turn to our colleagues on the line for initial feedback, because if the feedback is stop, hold, work, halt, nobody needs CUTRIC to get involved here. We're all able to do it all by ourselves. Great. I would love to know that so I don't waste our time and labor. But if the position is, look, we're now ready to go to fuel cell buses, but we do not either have the modeling or the feasibility, or we do, but we don't know how to procure. We're not sure what the right specs are in this technology. We know how to procure, but maybe not this technology. Or we don't know where to get the green hydrogen and we do want lower price points through a consortium volume model. Great, that's what we'd like to hear, because that's our trigger to start working on it. So to just set us up, I'm going to ask Melissa to come online. We're going to ask for a quick poll of our transit agencies on the line. We do have some private sector partners on the line, so I'm going to ask you not to answer the question if you're a private sector partner selling a product into this marketplace. What we're going to ask you to do is answer this poll if you are a transit agency member or representative of a city. So I'm going to ask, sorry, Jess, if you can do the poll, my mistake. And so we're going to put the poll question there. And this is just a first trigger for us. We would like to ask you, can you take 30 seconds to answer this question? How ready do you believe your organization is to transition to hydrogen fleet in the next 12 to 18 months? It doesn't have to be full fleet. So what we're looking at here is in the next 12 to 18 months, you think your city or transit agency is ready enough, maybe you're not entirely ready, but you're ready enough to start planning for a procurement in the next year to year and a half of hydrogen fuel cell buses. Maybe your first demonstrator, maybe your first pilot, and maybe an actual substantive procurement. So we'd like to ask you, are you not ready at all? You're almost ready. You're in some planning phase. You're very ready, but you don't know. If you could take a moment to answer that, and we're going to take your feedback. But I do realize, Jess, we're being unfair because hosts and panelists cannot vote, and they are some of our most important transit agencies on the line. So we have inadvertently excluded you. And so what we're going to do is take the vote right now, and then we're going to reissue the poll once we decommission you as a panelist here, and then we'll ask for the poll to be taken one more time. So I'm going to ask Jess if you can just flag to me once you've got the initial round of answers, and we'll see what they are. And then we'll do the poll one more time at the very end once we've decommissioned the panelists, so we can capture some leading transit agencies.
Yeah,
So
the only person we have over right now is Scott.
oh, good.
So that'll be the only information that we're missing. So if Scott wants to provide that, maybe in the panelist chat, we can kind of account for that.
Okay, very good. So Scott, sorry, we've excluded you, but we know the answer to the question is very likely for you because Brampton's moving that way. So as people are filling in that poll, I'm going to ask us to make Scott available as a panelist. And Scott, we've got you there. So we're going to start off with Brampton's feedback. We're going to move to the round table of feedback now for the initial insight into whether we go, no go at CUTRIC and starting to plan this. Scott, if you can just introduce yourself at Brampton Transit, and then I'm going to let people know on the line today, we do have a whole series of agencies. So if you are at Airdrie, Brampton Transit, Burlington, Calgary Transit, City of Edmonton, CMBC, which is Coast Mountain Bus, TransLink, Cornwall, or Durham. So we're going alphabetically up to the D level. If you're at one of those, if you could put your hand up, and Jess will make you a panelist. After that, we will turn to Edmonton, Fredericton, Halifax, Kings Transit, Medicine Hat, Metrolinx, Mississauga, into the M's. And then after that, we'll go to our colleagues at Ottawa, Sault Ste. Marie, Selkirk, St. John's, Toronto Transit Commission, STO, and Winnipeg Transit in York Region. So we've got the three chunks by alphabetical, so we can manage you on this Zoom line. Over to you, Scott, to start with. And what we'd love to hear your feedback on is the readiness and the go, no go, your advice to CUTRIC, and then some of your feedback on these queries at this point in time, and we'll turn to your colleagues thereafter.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Gilner with Brampton Transit. For those of you that don't know me, I've been working with CUTRIC and Josipa's team for a number of years, both on the battery electric side and the planning side. So we currently have our phase 1 battery electric trial running. It's been running for over a year now. It's a $16 million project, 8 battery electric buses, 4 opportunity chargers. We are doing the planning work with CUTRIC, both the feasibility planning as well as the implementation and rollout planning. We're about to finalize our scope of work for the latter study and get rolling through ZETF planning stream on that one. So we hope to wrap that up early next year. And with that implementation strategy in place, we'll have a roadmap in terms of our full fleet electrification. We know based on our planning work that we've done so far in terms of feasibility, that about 70% of our blocks and routes can be electrified using battery electric. But as Josipa mentioned earlier, there is about a 30% for Brampton's case anyway, where we would not be able to electrify using battery electric based on the existing blocks. We'd either have to substantially reblock our system, which is not feasible. We don't want to impact service to our ridership. We want the technology to fit the service, not the other way around. So we would be looking towards a mixed fleet in terms of fuel cell electric, and we've been extremely interested in the MiWay project from day one. Brampton, along with TTC and York, have been sitting on as technical advisors to that project to the MOU stage. and certainly remain very interested in it. We in fact have funding queued up for a two fuel cell bus trial, and we've been speaking with MiWay and CUTRIC on the possibility of joining that trial with our 2 buses here in Brampton. So we look forward to continuing that. I guess in terms of whether there's an appetite here for CUTRIC leadership, in Brampton's opinion, a fuel cell bus trial national would be definitely of interest to Brampton. Some of the key benefits that we've seen coming out of the phase 1 battery electric trial with our partners in TransLink and YRT that CUTRIC has provided to us is the program management and data analytics piece, risk mitigation, all the lessons learned that we're capturing through the 3 agencies, really the collaboration between the 3 transit agencies and the 4 OEMs involved in this project, which happen to be New Flyer, Nova Bus, ABB, and Siemens. This collaboration would not have been possible without the CUTRIC MOU structure that we've been working through, and I'm sure my colleagues at TransLink and York will second that. So yeah, we could have done a Brampton only pilot, but we wouldn't have been where we are today in the CUTRIC trial without the governance structure that we have in place. So I think there's definitely benefit there in terms of the procurement, whether it's a straightforward MOU approach similar to what we've done with the phase 1 battery electric trial, or a more global joint procurement initiative model. I think you really need to look at the details and the scope, and what is the overall supply chain requirement, what is the overall bus requirement, and kind of base the decision on that. I think for our phase 1 trial, for the reasons Josipa mentioned earlier in terms of technology readiness, the MOU approach worked extremely well for us, and that could work extremely well, I think, for a fuel cell trial as well. So maybe I'll leave it there, and I know there's a lot of people queued up to speak, so I don't want to take any more time, but certainly happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Scott, that's really helpful. So what we're hearing is yes, at least one of the models, whether it's MOU or joint procurement, could work. The collaborative arrangement that CUTRIC provides is helpful. And then you referenced what we've called the diamond in the GTHA that we've always wanted to come back to, which is, imagine MiWay has launched with 10 buses, but Enbridge can fuel up to 30 approximately right now with the current capacity. So if there were a Brampton TTC York Region MiWay arrangement, it's a beautiful diamond in the GTHA that drives up volume almost instantaneously. And at the base of that diamond is Metrolinx. So it's a real winner, and it's something that we've talked about for 5 years now. And I think the time is right for us to help initiate and move that forward. So that's great feedback. Anything you want to add there, Scott?
Just, very similar challenges with fuel cell as in with battery, in terms of the bus side of the equation seems to be the more straightforward, simple side of the procurement equation and the operations. The fueling side, whether it's electric, chargers or hydrogen fueling supply, I think that's the big challenge. And I know supply chain in Ontario is a huge challenge. If we can get past that hurdle, I think there's definitely an appetite for agencies to move to hydrogen. And so, the sooner the better we can get that experience. And that's why we're thinking, a very small 2-bus trial combined with MiWay's 10-bus trial and potentially others would provide that learning experience for us.
That's very helpful. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn to our colleagues at Coast Mountain. Graham, we've got you on the line, but just before we do, I'll turn to Jess. We have the results of the poll, and it's not surprising. So we've got about 50% of those who responded said, no, not ready in the next 2 years. That's okay, because we're going to come back to you in 2 years from now. So this is not a one and done. We expect that there'll be around 3 and around 4. So maybe you're on our list for 2 years from now. And just like Scott said, TTC, York Region, Brampton, we're on our fuel cell bus advisory process for multiple years before coming back now at a readiness level. But this is what's really interesting, the almost ready or in planning phase or very ready. That's adding up there to almost to the other 50% roughly, and that's the market for CUTRIC to get involved with. So we're going to be reaching out to all of you who answered the poll as almost ready, in planning, very ready, to see how we can help. If you're very ready, you may not need our help. If you're in planning phase or almost ready, you may be in that optimal 12 to 18 months collaborative mode. So that's very helpful empirical insight for us. With that, we're going to turn to Graham. Graham, over to you. I think we can unmute you and you can show your video if you wish. And if you can just introduce yourself, Graham, for the purpose of everyone.
Sure, thanks, Josipa. Hi, everyone. My name is Graham Kavanaugh. I'm a senior planner at TransLink on the new mobility team. I am not a battery electric bus or hydrogen fuel cell expert, but I do work on policy and strategy for innovations in transportation, as well as support research partnerships and pilot demonstrations. So I'm really here to learn a lot today from this presentation and from others on the line. What I can tell you is that TransLink recently completed our 30-year Vision Transport 2050, which includes a 80% GHG reduction by 2050. And we have tested battery electric buses, and we're on the docket to procure around 500 buses soon. We're also partnering with University of British Columbia to conduct some research on the life cycles of the batteries themselves. So end of life, disposal or reuse options, because we don't want to create any e-waste as a result of our climate action strategy. Our low carbon fleet strategy is led by our director, Ralph Nielsen. I'm not sure if he's on the call today, but he's been working much more closely with this process. Also really excited to hear that in Burnaby, there's been a new cell-centric facility that's opened that's working on hydrogen fuel cell manufacturing. I think it's primarily focused for goods movement, long-haul trucking, but I was recently at a Vancouver Entrepreneurs Forum, Invest Vancouver conference, and someone was visiting from Germany and referred to Burnaby as the Silicon Valley of hydrogen fuel cells. So that was just exciting to hear anyway, that there is movement, initiating there. Yeah, I thought that Soumya did a great job of outlining some of the key challenges that transit authorities are thinking about. Certainly infrastructure, costs, charging times. I was recently on a call with a startup called Dana that is looking at in-motion charging using semiconductors, which we thought was pretty interesting. Yeah, supply chains, absolutely. Globally, that's an issue. Government subsidies are something we'd certainly be interested in. Joint procurement or MOU seem like good options for us. Let's see, what else? Data collection, KPIs, absolutely for any pilot demonstration project. Team capacity, always an issue for any of these new mobility initiatives. It's the nature of, all of the technology and business models being new and innovative. So there's a lack of expertise in these areas, but great to have organizations like CUTRIC that can help support there. Other partnerships, obviously, BC Hydro, our hydroelectric energy provider for the region, and Fortis BC. Definitely interested in extending battery electric bus lives using hydrogen fuel cells for extended time and range operations, just due to the greater energy storage density. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Graham, that's really helpful, very thorough. And of course, Randy sits on our board at Coast Mountain, Randy Helmer, and then Ralph sits on the program steering committee for the electric bus project. And based on your feedback, what I am thinking is our team will take this away because we're currently preparing a very robust scope of work under the Zero Emissions Transit Fund for work with TransLink. And Ralph Nielsen actually was one of the first to indicate to us that TransLink does want to move forward with fuel cell buses in the next few years. And he was looking at maybe a couple, and I proposed to Ralph, what about 10 as a baseline minimum because of development of the integration, all the lessons learned. He was open to that. So we'll follow up with your team and with Ralph and Randy on the 10 bus deployment. There's a role there for Fortis, there's a role there for BC Hydro, and there's certainly, as you noted, in Burnaby, a hydrogen fuel cell sector. It's in the backyard of our colleagues at Ballard. So there's a lot of folks in the BC government also very supportive. I think we could have another West Coast integrated deployment of a national demonstrator. So Graham, very helpful to us. And thank you very much for sharing your insights there. What I would like to ask now for folks is if you can put up your hand. Jess has also sent the invite to those of you who may want to join as panelists to share your insight. We know we have our colleagues from Edmonton, Halifax, and Winnipeg on the line. So for those of you who are from Edmonton, Halifax, or Winnipeg, We would love to hear from you to the extent that you're willing to share. And you can simply put your hand up and Jess will make you a presenter or panelist. We also have our colleagues from MiWay on the line, from Fredericton, and also from TTC and York Region. So if you're on the line as well and you have input here, we would certainly appreciate it. And so Jess, I'll just turn to you to see, because I think we sent out a few of those invites for panelists, but folks may not see that the box pops up. And so let me know if you've got any other panelists that are lined up. In the meantime, just over to you, Jess.
Yeah, if folks can put up their hand, I have sent out a couple, but there are a few folks that I'm not finding in the list where it seems to be sorted by folks' first name.
Oh, I see. So you may not have your organizational name there. And we do have a couple late registrants, I think, who are not in my original list, but I do see you on the line here. So what I'm also going to ask is for a few of you who are now from the fueling side of the equation. And as I said, if you are from a city, you are from a transit agency, King's Transit, Medicine Hat, Metrolinx, etc., we see you on the line. So if you did want to add your insight, just put your hand up. We'll make you a panelist right away. But if you are from the fueling side of the equation, the manufacturing side, we do welcome your input as well at this stage, because we do have enough to go with right now from our polling results, from CNBC's input, and also from TransLink's input and Brampton's input. So we are more than able to move forward with initiating a national procurement strategy for our next session. But we do want to give an opportunity to those of you who are fuel suppliers or manufacturers on the line for you to also provide your insight. And as we just give you that moment to put your hand up, we'll just ask Salmia, if you don't mind, Salmia, then going to the last slide, which is our thank you slide. And here, in terms of the roundtable, just to give you a sense of what's going to happen now after this, we're going to compile the results of the feedback we received and also share with you this deck, which will contain all the information. We'll share with you the recording via our YouTube channel if you'd like to share it internally. And then our team will reach out to all of you to see if you would like to get a little bit more information. If you haven't started at all, you're in that 56% of folks who are not yet ready at all. That may mean that you haven't done any of your feasibility planning, and there is money for you. The federal government will cover it at 80%, and we run that program. So we'll reach out to you for our Zero Emissions Transit Fund, because you might just need the starting help there to start doing the initial planning of, is it battery electric bus or fuel cell electric bus, and what do our facilities need to look like, etc. So that's our pathway forward. The next session we have already scheduled 2 for this fall, and another session for early next year, at which point our intention is to close it after Q1 of 2023 to have our core group of participants to move forward within a 12-month timeframe to a larger procurement. I'm going to pause there for a moment and turn to Salmia for any final items.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. You covered it up. Yeah, so we do have 2 or maybe even 3 more sessions planned, depending on how the needs assessment progresses, because we'd really love to better understand your resources and constraints as well, because at the end of the day, they are factored into how the funding splits look, and the timing of these kinds of projects as well. We'd also like to better understand and then discuss with everyone, anonymized, of course, discuss the level of consensus and density mapping of your procurement readiness, and especially your preferred collaboration models, because end of the day, it's these collab models which will help us better understand how we can prepare our resources, and basically what role we can play to advance not just your goals forward, but also advance the hydrogen fuel cell industry together. End of the day, sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Yep, thanks very much, Salmia. So that does help us wrap up. I do just want to ask our final colleague, Amr Sami. I think, Amr, you asked the question online. Are there any specific requirements for having faulty fleet BEBs or HFCs side by side under the same roof? and you're concerned about fire protection. I did answer in there. If you'd like to raise your question directly, you can certainly put up your hand and we can make you a panelist here. But having said that, I provided a short answer there. There is a large discussion underway, and it has been for the last few years, not just storing the faulty fleet side by side, but how closely indoors can you store hydrogen for your hydrogen buses and your high power charger for your high power charged buses, and what are the standards around that. And when we did the last round of research around that about 4 years ago, it was really pulling off a lot of the regulations from the CNG sector. It is most certainly the kind of thing that a demonstrator should plan out and demonstrate across the country, that you can in fact house electric buses and fuel cell buses side by side or within some safe distance. And you can in fact house the fueling equipment within some safe distance, because for those agencies with mixed fleets, they don't all have segregated garages. So that is something that we fully intend would be part of this kind of demonstrator at some level. Now, we do have 2 additional folks who have put up their hand to add their input here. And so I'm just going to turn to our colleague Amr. I see you there. So over to you if you wanted to add your insight. If you can just introduce yourself though first, Amr.
Okay. My name is Amr Sami. I am Sustainable Fleet Analyst at Halifax Transit. And I asked that questions because at some point in the future, we have this transmission period. Most likely service providers will have at some point to have mixed fleet. And this really concerns us, how we plan to modify our transit center. If we decide to demolish the transit center and build a new one, should we have a separate barns, semi-separate barns? Did the code catch up at that point? Is there any research going on? And I'm looking for information from subject matter experts. Thank you.
That's very helpful. And we'll take that away. And Salmia, we've got some insights from Scott and from Amr and also from Graham about things they want to hear at the next session. And we'll take that as guidance on what we need to come to the next session with to help guide you. So thanks very much for that, Amr. Very important query. On that, I'm going to turn to our colleagues at New Flyer. Hi, Chad. We've got you on the line. So over to you from the industry side.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Giuseppa. I just wanted to kind of comment on what Scott had mentioned about the bus is definitely ready. And when I was looking at the presentation, noticing that there was roughly, correct me if I'm wrong, like a 7 to 12% gap. Good news is new technology coming out. I think we're going to close that gap even further. I can't talk too much about it, but we will be introducing our latest and greatest technologies in the coming months. So it'll lessen that gap and be able to better serve all blocks, not just the ones that can be routed now. So just wanted to add that little piece. And
is there anything you can add there just in terms of the slide, essentially the slide that we had up there about the technology on the fuel cell tank side of so the fuel cell power level, the tank size, and also the storage out there. To the extent that you're able to say anything, some of the discussions have been on the industry side, folks have said, let's go to the higher, like the larger tank level, and Transit has also said that, but our bus manufacturers have historically said, no, it's a smaller tank. And so if there's any insight you could provide on the tank size for the future, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, the tank size, we're limited by what our suppliers can supply us, and which we're taking the largest ones we can right now, looking at the safety level of it. However, we are looking at possibly more tanks. So we have quite a bit of real estate on top of the roof when you don't have a whole bunch of batteries up there. So we are looking at that. And it's always the law of diminishing returns, where you're looking at how much weight you're going to add to the vehicle versus how much more range you're going to get out of it. So.
Well, thanks for that little bit of insight. We stay very interested.
That for a non-answer, but keep putting the hook in and hoping everyone will. I'll send out the invitation once we're about to announce the latest and greatest.
That is fantastic. And what we will do, Salma, is at the next session, we will start off with a review of the top technology available in the marketplace in Canada today. So with that, I will just see, Jess, if we have anybody else lined up who did want to add their insights at this stage.
We have a couple of folks who are just switching over to panelist right now. They should have invites on their screens.
That's great. And Scott, I see you unmuted. I'm not sure if you wanted to add something there.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Oh,
sorry. Having some technical issues on my end.
No worries. It's a runaway microphone. So we do have a couple more folks there, and let me just let them pop up here in a second. I think we have Jessica on the line, Jessica Loft. So Jessica, over to you. If you can just introduce yourself, Jessica, so everybody knows where you're coming from. We'll just give her, there we go.
There we go. There we go. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Giuseppe, Samia, for hosting this event. It's really great. My name is Jessica Loaf. I am from Air Products Canada. This is a really great session, and it's really great work that CUTRIC does to be able to bring everybody together and help provide the tools and the analytics to help inform and provide that necessary knowledge base to be able to make the decisions to transition to the zero emission buses, which of course we hope to include hydrogen in that. So background for Air Products. Air Products is a global leader in hydrogen production, but also in hydrogen for mobility. So we are very keen and eager and ready to support Canadian transit agencies in transitioning fleets to fuel cell electric. In terms of hydrogen supply, we have hydrogen supply in Ontario, in Sarnia, Ontario. It is a gray hydrogen there, but it is a liquid product. We also have hydrogen supply in Edmonton, Alberta. And we've just made a large investment, and we're moving forward with a $1.3 billion facility, which will produce blue hydrogen, and it will have a liquid component to that as well. Our strengths are really in that liquid component. So when we're working with transit agencies, we're able to offer a supply chain that closely resembles that of diesel. So it's reliable. You're able to have a hydrogen supply from multiple sources. So if the supply of, let's say, Ontario goes down, you're able to supply it from other sources that are across the North American network. So this is very strong. When it comes to the fuel supply, but you also have the station infrastructure as well, the fueling infrastructure. So Air Products has tremendous experience in this as well. We have fueling stations across the world, really, but we have been working with agencies in California and help them with their conversions. We have to have a trusted partner to provide that equipment there so that you have that reliability and assurance with that technology side. We've invested in that since the 90s, so this is a continual development. So again, you want to look at those trusted partners there. I also want to stress, and Giuseppe, you talked about this a bit too, we got to get beyond the pilot stage. When things get expensive is when you're talking about 1 to 2 buses. We need to be thinking at larger scale. It doesn't have to be a full fleet conversion, but think about 10 to 20 to 30 buses. And that's where you really see the benefits of the hydrogen fuel cell electric bus. So hydrogen scales very well. So if you just start with the 10 buses, and then you're easily able to scale to much larger fleet conversion. So we got to think beyond testing 1 or 2 buses. Let's think of more, and let's, when we do the evaluation, let's see what the larger proportion of the fleet conversions will look like. So take that holistic look when we're doing our analysis there. But I'll just end with that. Air Products is ready to support and provide information where needed, costs and the scoping out the projects. We're happy to help out. We have got tons of resources there. We've got a huge team. I don't know if an American team, hydrogen mobility team, we're ready to support. So just please give us a call and I'll help out.
And it's a good way to segue to the end of the webinar, Jessica, because one of the big things we did raise in our project is, of course, as we look to green hydrogen, it does come off the grid. Are there disruptions to the grid? Sure, there are. There's storms, there's all kinds of issues that cause disruptions to the grid, most of which is climate change as well, and impacts on grid infrastructure. So what we have looked at is, as we deploy these vehicles and these fueling systems, having a backup supply chain and making sure that there is a resilient and reliable backup, whether that's in the form of blue or gray. That may be a choice that we need to make in the near term in order to make sure that the vehicle systems get deployed. So thanks very much for that insight, Jessica, and that will most certainly be part of the equation, the planning. Over to Jess. Jess, any final folks on the line that want to add their voice?
This is actually more of just a bit of housekeeping. We've got some folks who've turned camera on today, and if you can just give your feedback, you can just send it to us in the chat if you're comfortable, like maybe just flagging if you're not comfortable with your image when we post this on our YouTube channel, just flagging that in the chat. So if we don't hear from you in the chat, we're going to take that as consent.
That's great. Thanks for reminding us all, Jess. And with that, I think we've come to the end. We've ended 11 minutes early, but we got through all the materials we needed to. I want to thank the team for all of the content that they put together, but also for everybody's input here today and for all the participants, because of course, we can't get a project out the door without starting the dialogue somewhere. It's great that over 50 agencies registered for this discussion. That is way more than we had 6 years ago. So that in and of itself is a good starting point. Salmia, over to you.
Real quick, yes, but I think Steve Matthews also had a hand raised. Steve, in case you'd like to come on the camera.
Oh, did we miss Steve?
Yeah.
No, I sent him an invite, but there was a
Okay.
decline. I can send another one, Steve, and if you decline that by mistake, feel free to move over to panelist role. And if you hit decline, we'll know that it's a hand maybe for something else. Maybe you can write it in the Q&A if it's a question.
So I think we captured them all, Salmia, but thanks for flagging that. We didn't want to leave anybody out in the cold on that. So Sandeep, thanks very much. We've got your question there about would love to connect with any supply chain folks working on post-commissioning. And Sandeep has put his email in there at TTC. So folks, if you are on the line still and you're in that space, you can reach out to Sandeep directly. So thank you very much, everyone, again, for your time. And we will be inviting you to the next session. I do believe in relentlessness and just the annoyance methodology of pestering until we get the project out the door. It does work. So thanks again in the interest of the climate and the interest of Canadian hydrogen fuel cell economy and zero emissions buses. We look forward to working with you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you very, very much, everyone.